plunged in the depth of helpless poverty. A girl, woman alone, on Battersea Bridge, reading a letter in the December sunset. One of those mild autumnal afternoons which hang upon the skirts of winter. A girl in years, a woman in cares, dark brown eyes set in a pale, sharply set face, mouth rosy and beautiful in form, but too firm in its lines to be altogether lovely in a woman. A girl whom the passers-by look at interrogatively, wondering that so much beauty should go alone, and so poorly clad. Her clothes are not common, but shabby, a black silk dress that has once been handsome and fashionable, a black felt hat trimmed with threadbare velvet, a sealskin jacket worn bald at the edges and dull with exposure to hard weather, gloves which indicate that to be gloved at all has cost the wearer a struggle, boots whose decay is no less evident than the symmetry of the slender feet they cover. She walks listlessly up and down the pavement of the bridge, just the one quiet promenade to be found in this neighbourhood, reading a letter from home, or the place which was her home 2 years ago. She has seen much of the world during these 2 years, in her own opinion too much, for she has seen not the fair and shining fabric in life's loom, but the ragged sleeve thereof. This is the letter which she reads, not once, but 3 times over, with deepest attention, as she paces up and down the quiet old bridge, while the sunset fades from the cold grey river, and from that Dutch picture of old red roofs and waterside shanties on the Middlesex shore, which painters have loved, and which the Thames embankment may perchance have blotted out by this time. Redcastle, December 11th, 1860 . My dear Sybil, an event has happened which I think likely to exercise a wonderful influence for good upon all our lives. Stephen Trenchard, your mother's brother, the Uncle Stephen you have all talked about as children, and whose wealth was your poor mother's boast, has returned to England after nearly 30 years' absence, yellow, wrinkled and withered, and eccentric in manners and habits, but I think not unkindly disposed to any of us. He has taken a house at Redcastle, and is anxious to have his nieces about him, as he calls it. Marion has already exchanged the discomforts and deprivations of a parish doctor's household for the oriental luxuries of Lancaster Lodge. I dare say you remember the house, a square stone building with 2 tall iron gates and 2 lodges within 30 yards of the hall door. Some people will have grandeur at the sacrifice of consistency. He seems, I mean your Uncle Stephen, to have taken a great fancy to Marion. I meet her lolling in his barouche, trying to look as if she had been accustomed to ride in a 300-guinea carriage all her life, and really doing it very well. Jenny has also been to see her uncle, but he thought her rough and uncultivated, and I fear that, with her present deficiency of manners, she has little chance of pleasing him. I have sent her to Miss Mercer's as a day scholar since Michaelmas, but as she will talk to the boys going and returning, I really think the change is doing her more harm than good. I have dined with Mr. Trenchard, and can assure you that the splendour of his table is something to remember. I don't pretend to be a judge of wines, though I could give you a lecture upon tannic acid, alcohol, and so on, experience to my mind being better than theory, and my opportunities of the rarest, but I know that after dining with Stephen Trenchard I felt as if my veins ran quicksilver. Well, my dear, I want you to have your chance as well as Marion, and I think the best and wisest course for you will be to beg a month's holiday from your employer, Mrs. Hazelton, and come to spend Christmas with your poor old Uncle Robert. No doubt if you do, your rich old Uncle Stephen will ask you to transfer your society to Lancaster Lodge, and then you and Marion will have equal chances. I dare say it will end by his asking one or both of you to live with him and keep his house. He has, I believe, something like $1 million to leave behind him, and you 3 girls are his nearest relations and his natural heirs. He has spoken very kindly of your mother. Let me know what Mrs. Hazelton says about a holiday. If a month is too much, you might ask for a fortnight. I should think it most unlikely that you need ever return to her. With such a man as old Trenchard for your uncle, and well disposed towards you, your teaching days ought to be over. Your affectionate uncle, Robert Faunthorpe. My teaching days, repeats the young woman bitterly. He little knows that they were the height of luxury compared to what has come after them. The letter is addressed to Miss Faunthorpe at Mrs. Hazelton's, 19 Lowther Street, Eccleston Square. It had been readdressed by a humble friend of Miss Faunthorpe's in the person of Mrs. Hazelton's housemaid, who has enclosed the letter in an envelope directed to Mrs. Stanmore at Mrs. Bonney's, 11 Dixon Street, Chelsea, an address which indicates a descent in the social scale from the semi-Belgravian gentility of Lowther Street, Eccleston Square. And how comes Miss Faunthorpe to be Mrs. Stanmore, while her affectionate uncle Robert Faunthorpe remains unaware of a transmutation which must needs have some influence, for good or evil, on his niece's future career? Marriage is one of those inadvertencies which can hardly go for nothing, even in the easiest life. So Marion is exhibiting herself about Redcastle in a 300 guinea barouche, says Mrs. Stanmore, putting the letter in her pocket, while I have hardly shoes to my feet. I, who was supposed to be the handsome sister, and the clever sister, and the lucky sister, and I dare not show my face in Redcastle, not even if 500,000 of money is to be lost by my absence. To think that Uncle Stephen should choose just this particular time for his return, to think that he should return at all, when Marion and I made up our minds ever so long ago that he was little better than a myth, and was sure to have married a Begum without telling anybody, and to die in India, leaving all his money to horrid copper-coloured children. Lucky for Marion. Then, after a pause, leaving the bridge and entering the shabby street leading to Chain Walk, she continues her self-communing thus. What shall I say to Uncle Robert? Suppose he were to come to town and call at Mrs. Hazelton's. He may have money now to pay for the journey. It was safe enough before. Poor Uncle Robert never had a spare pound, or ever wasted a shilling, except the shillings he had to pay for summonses because of being behindhand with the taxes. If he should come up to London, or if Uncle Stephen should be in town and call in Lowther Street, more likely that. Anglo-Indians are such active creatures. What am I to do? Thus disjointedly run her thoughts as she walks, very quickly now, along the narrow shabby street, past the fried fish shop and the pork butcher's, and the emporium for the second-hand goods, from a picture of the Holy Family after Raphael, very much framed, to a flat iron, or a pair of bluchers, the greengrocer's, also coal merchant, the cook shop, with its steamed, tarnished windows and reeking odour of boiled beef and stick-jaw pudding. That reminds me, Mrs. Stanmore says to herself, as the reek of cooked provisions salutes her nostrils. There's nothing for dinner. She pauses and takes counsel with herself. Her eye wanders from the cook shop to the fishmonger's, thence ranges to the pork butcher's. Her election lies among these. Cambridge sausages are savoury, but dear, and Mrs. Bonney, the landlady, has a trick of overdoing all things entrusted to her culinary art. A pound of Cambridge sausages, reduced to grounds and grease, are hardly worth the shilling they cost. Boiled beef is expensive and weighs heavy. For a cheap relish, a zest which shall make bread and butter supply the place of dinner. Your fishmonger is your best friend. Mrs. Stanmore patronises the finny tribe. She selects an 8-penny haddock, dried and salted from the merchant's store, and carries it home with her, rolled up in brown paper. She stops at the cheap baker's for a half-quartern loaf, with which the bit over is not unacceptable. I wonder what Marion would think if she could see me now, she asks herself. Marion, who always complained of my pride and called herself the Cinderella of the family. Her Cinderella-ship never brought her so low as this. Home. Bitter mockery of a sweet word. She turns out of the shabby street into a street still shabbier, narrow, dirty, and out at elbows. yet at its worst not quite so bad as a modern street under the same conditions, for the red brick houses are substantial and roomy, and the worm-eaten oaken window frames